Everyone, this is Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I think I have spotted another hypocrite. This one I found lounging about on the shores of MSNBC. Rachel Maddow. This is Rachel Maddow's second appearance. For the most part, she was flagrantly red baiting, which was part of the reason I pulled her on the last one. And this is for the most part the exact same thing, just done in a completely different way. So she's given this intricate, detailed report about investigations swirling around Trump. So that's some of the basis of it. But throughout this report, she's showing connections between many of the people in Trump's circle versus people in Putin's circle, and how those people have had kind of like in-between conversations. All of this is fine. It's an interesting story. But, you know, let's let her finish the point first, just to get a little bit more context.
Russia. It is fine that may or may not have landed on Mike Flynn's desk the week before he was fired because of revelations about his contacts with the Russian government, about sanctions, which he admits to lying about, and which he reportedly also lied about to the FBI. You know, if Mike Flynn did lie about his contacts with the Russian government when he spoke to the FBI about those contacts, if he did lie to the FBI, that would be a felony. Of course, it's a felony that would have to be prosecuted by the Justice Department, which is run by Jeff Sessions. CNN is already reporting that there are no plans in Jeff Sessions' Justice Department to prosecute Mike Flynn for lying to the FBI, despite clear reports and indications that he lied to the FBI. Reuters reported this weekend that there are 3 separate FBI investigations into contacts between the Trump campaign and the Trump administration and the Russian government. If any of those 3 separate FBI inquiries leads to findings of criminal behavior, again, the FBI doesn't prosecute stuff, they refer it to the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions, who would have to decide whether or not to prosecute. Because Jeff Sessions was part of the Trump campaign, under normal circumstances, you would expect that to lead to an Attorney General appointing a special counsel, so he himself would not be involved in decisions about bringing charges against a campaign that he was part of. So far, Jeff Sessions is refusing to take that kind of a step or recuse himself from any of these investigations, from overseeing any of these matters. And so this is a test. We are living through an American test right now. I mean, the press, forgive me, but the press is doing its job. Every day we learn more and more from the press about otherwise unexplained pro-Russian behavior and the myriad Russian contacts of lots and lots of people who are connected to this president at very high levels. But watch what happens in Austria tomorrow. Watch and see if this Putin-connected, Paul Manafort-connected, super sketchy Russian-Ukrainian oligarch is going to still be in the crosshairs of American prosecutors or not. With each passing day, we get more of a sense of what is wrong here, right? With each new news story, right, we get more of a sense of what is really going on at the heart of this mishigas between this president, this administration, and Russia. But diagnosing the problem and fixing the problem are not the same thing. And the question of whether or not this thing can be fixed, whether this thing can be investigated and exposed and ultimately fixed, it depends in large part, I'm sorry to say it, depends in large part on whether or not the United States Department of Justice is still a Department of Justice and will enforce this as a law enforcement matter. The question is whether this Justice Department is independent enough to stand up for the rule of law on matters this serious. If it's not, if under Jeff Sessions the Justice Department is just going to be another part of this same scheme, the scheme that we're seeing unspool every day with each strange new revelation in the press, if the Justice Department is just going to be part of it rather than part of fixing it, then we are going to need a different kind of remedy to fight back against what Russia has already done to our government, what Russia has already done to our election system, what Russia has already done to us, and what apparently they are still working on doing. So overall, this is a test of the rule of law in this country.
She went from 0 to 100 in like 20 seconds. I gotta be honest, I don't know what Rachel Maddow was talking about on a lot of that. She said this is more and more every day we get a sense, or better sense, of what's going on. illuminate me. I don't know. I don't, what? What's the sense that I'm supposed to get? In fact, I feel a little bit excluded by the whole thing. Because I don't know what that sense is. She was like, you get a sense of what's wrong with this picture. Well, please tell me, what's wrong with this picture? He's interacting with Trump. He's being investigated. Good, he should be investigated. But I don't know what special secret you think you have, you've peered into the nature of this particular thing and came back with some kind of insights through some means other than observation. I don't particularly know what your insights are on this, because, I mean, mind you read the story as if everybody would understand completely clearly that something is going on in this situation. I do not necessarily take that as a foregone conclusion that something's going on with the situation. It may or may not be. They have an investigation going on. The problem is, Rachel, you can't make that argument, though, because on this, you lack, again, credibility. So you're making the case right here that the problem is, does the United States still have a functioning Justice Department? Because, look, for the most part, is it independent enough that if it comes back and says that there's crimes that was committed, either by the president or by one of his minions, will Jeff Sessions either recuse himself to allow somebody else to take lead on that particular subject, or will Sessions just not recuse himself and just wave it away? She's making the case that if he just waves it away, particularly if there's evidence, then for the most part, we no longer have a functioning Justice Department. And that out of political opportunism, usurp that role. Or at the very least, an honest appraisal of justice from the perspective of that particular department. And look, she's right. She's absolutely right. It's not necessarily... Look, he has a role. The Justice Department has a role. And if you're just going to neuter it because things come up that's against your particular president, then she's right. The Justice Department is not doing its job at that point, out of political reasons. But by the same token, Rachel, if you're going to make that case, you have to be held to the same standard. Interview after interview, you went through this story in minute, intricate detail. You were just crawling through it, just pulling back all this information. Look, I could be wrong. I've seen interviews between you and Hillary Clinton. At no point do I remember you crawl into her information in that way. I mean, look, there was the Podesta emails. And the Podesta emails showed actual corruption. Now look, and if you're so hopped up on the lying thing, she lied to the FBI herself. Take a look at Comey's testimony. Comey's testimony, they asked him over and over again, did she lie? Comey essentially says, yes, she lied. They asked him, why didn't you prosecute her? And Comey said, essentially whether she lied or not has nothing to do with whether they could win their case. She was guilty of what they were talking about. They just can't make the case. They just didn't want to bring the charges. But even if you get past that point, once you dive into the Podesta files, it's a treasure trove of corruption. So selling weapons out of the State Department after getting money from foreign governments into the Clinton Foundation. I mean, they were essentially using it as a slush fund. But Rachel, I don't remember you doing these stories at all. And look, I would imagine that would be absolutely fascinating for you. Because think about it. You have a candidate. Candidate becomes Secretary of State. As Secretary of State, that particular candidate gets money from a private organization. After it gets that money from that private organization, a ban is lifted with regards to weapons going to Saudi Arabia. Is that coincidental? To add one more layer to that, the Podesta emails also note that Hillary Clinton says Saudi Arabia is a state sponsor of terror. Essentially, they spread that particular strand of radical Islam throughout the region. And yet, that did not stop her from sending them arms. Or, for that matter, taking their money. But these stories weren't interesting to you, Rachel. Is that what I'm to understand? This story is fascinating to you. They're dealing with Russia and everything else. But based on your own standard that you just set. I mean, look, I agree with you. You set a precedent right here. You said, even though it is within this person's party, you still have to do your job. You can't be partisan at a degree where other things matter and other things exist. I agree with you. I think you need to, tell that speech to yourself also. Because you're completely oblivious to the fact that you are doing the same thing you're castigating them for doing. Not your job. Because, look, over and over again, all of the information that was coming up about Hillary, whether it was Podesta emails, and look, I'm not talking about fake news stuff. I'm talking about actual stuff. That's the things in those Podesta emails were real. The DNC hacks, those things were real. You didn't want to cover that stuff because that hurt your candidate. Even though it was your job to cover that stuff. Particularly since you're supposed to be a liberal. So, I get your outrage over the Trump thing, and you're right to be outraged by it. I don't even know what it is to be outraged by, and I suspect you don't either. I suspect you just want to tar him with Russia. Which is gross, man. It's one thing if you guys had something concrete about it. I agree with you. It looks fishy as all hell. But it looks fishy. Until you get actual evidence. Until you have actual proof. Nothing's going to be done on this front. So, you guys are whipping yourself up into this red bait fervor. She's talking about what Russia has done to this country. What has Russia done to this country? What are you talking about? She full well believes that Hillary Clinton lost that election because of Russia. They're in a goddamn bubble. They're in an absolute bubble. And the funny part, it never occurred to me that she thought that. That's such a simplistic thought, right? It's like, she said she wants to dwell in her fantasy land instead of come to the realization of how horrible that party is, that it couldn't even appeal to people with an overwhelming demographic advantage, and even an overwhelming advantage in regards to how their policies line up with public sentiment. And they still lost. So, Rachel, if you're going to put that measurement stick, you got to be held to the same standard. In order to have credibility, when you do stories like this, you have to, at the very least, be fair in the stories that you're going to do. Because, look, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Because you're going to be dismissed immediately. So say, for instance, somebody is looking at this video. They know you're Rachel Maddow. And in the same way that I'm kind of making a critique of saying, well, wait a minute. She didn't do her job when she had to interview Clinton. She didn't do her job. But how is she having a go at this guy, for not doing their job? I'm making the point that, yes, Jeff Sessions has to do with the Attorney General, but we're talking about within the scope of what they do. She made a decision, a political decision, not to hit Hillary Clinton and not to get into her information. For this particular guy, she thinks it's perfectly okay, though. And look, it is okay, but so is getting into Hillary Clinton's information. Both of those things were fair game. The public should know who they're voting for. The public should know who they're dealing with. So, yes, this is perfectly fine. I'm making the point. She doesn't have credibility to make the argument, though. It's purely partisan. If I was a Trump supporter and I heard her do this, the first thing I would say is, she's jealous. Or I would say, whatever, she didn't do this for Hillary Clinton. She's just being biased. When you don't have credibility, you can easily be pigeonholed as biased. Meaning nothing that you're going to say is going to get through to any of those people. You are fundamentally talking to yourself. So, look, again, just my piece of advice. I mean, I get it. To some degree, you guys are deflated. And I guess you need to talk to yourself to kind of gin up some courage or some positive feelings, I guess. But this is kind of a gross way to do it. At the very least, get evidence first before you go screaming on a loud mic of what Russia did to this country. Tone it down, man. Tone it down.